into the truth frequency.
Your protection from deception. This is Truth Frequency Radio.
And welcome to High Protest. This is Donald Jeffries coming to you from just outside the swamp-infested Washington, D.C., as I do every Friday at this time. Have a really information-packed show for you today. Two great guests, and we're going to obviously concentrate on this. The only issue at this point that it's taken over everything else, shut down the world. So what else are you going to talk about at this point? Whitney Webb has been on the show before. She's got a huge following on the internet. She's now working for The Last American Vagabond, but her work has appeared everywhere. The Ron Paul Institute, LouRockwell.com, lots of other places, and she's a very popular figure on the internet. And as work, she's, I guess, gone from being the pathfinder on the Epstein case to being one of the leading voices on this COVID issue that is taking us all over. Whitney, welcome to the show again.
Hey, it's great to be with you. Thanks for having me back on.
Oh, my pleasure. So let's talk first of all, just before, because I know you're working on a new article you're going to have out tomorrow, and you tend to specialize in things, and so you're going after these contracts that may go out to some of these pharmaceutical companies or whatever for potential vaccines, which seems to be one result of the end game here. I'm still not sure what the end game is for all this, but what are your impressions just on this whole thing? I mean, I mean, are you as shocked as I am? I mean, I'm just still trying to get over what we're a part of at this point. I mean, the entire world virtually was shut down in a couple weeks and without a shot troop on the streets. What are your impressions of this issue before we get into the specifics of what you're writing about?
Well, since it's such a broad crisis, it's affecting so many countries, it's really hard to sort of crystallize my views about the complexity of the situation just into a few points. But some things that I've noticed, not just in the U.S. in terms of the U.S. government response, but a couple other countries, is that there have been efforts to essentially manipulate and I would say fudge the data, whether that's overinflating or underinflating. And that is something that I think people need to really consider, take some time to really think about, because basically all these policies, all of this decision making that has so greatly impacted us socially, economically, really on every facet of life, have been based on data that is, by all indications, not accurate. And in several cases in the United Kingdom, for example, and now more recently in the U.S., the initial predictions of what the deaths would be, which was the justification for all of these lockdowns, for example, turned out to be grossly exaggerated by a large degree. And several of the people that were involved in making those over-the-top predictions that they later, after the lockdown was in place, revised way, way down to a significant degree. I think in the UK, for example, there was this guy named Neil Ferguson who were saying millions in the UK would die. And now he's saying, well, maybe it'll be 20,000. And he was, of course, basing all of this off of, some goofy model that he came up with.
Well, he was I think one of the main guys that the media based all the hysteria on it and the response. But I don't see the response lightening up at all. In fact, if anything, they're cracking down harder in my area. I'm in Virginia, but what's it like in Chile there? Have first cases, and are you all quarantined there? I'm assuming you're dealing with the same stuff we are.
It's relatively similar. Obviously, the measures are more extreme if you are living in a large metropolitan center, and I think that's also true for the U.S. I think Chile's case is interesting, though, because if you notice, there was this odd trend sort of at the beginning when all these lockdowns were beginning, that a lot of the first countries to lock down were countries that were having large scale protests against the government. And of course,
Yes.
that lockdown order resulted in the end of those protest movements. France being one, the yellow vests were taken off the streets. Another one being Spain, where the protesters in Barcelona for the independence of Catalonia were also, forced to lock down. And Chile is another example. There have been large protests against several unpopular programs. Mainly the pension system in Chile that was imposed during the military dictatorship of Pinochet.
Yeah.
Protests about that beginning last October. And those protests were just starting to pick up when the government here in Chile decided to declare, a lockdown and essentially suspend the constitution for 90 days. And that was before Chile had even recorded a single death, and only 19 people were in the hospital that had tested positive for coronavirus. So amazing that they would clamp down like that when there isn't even a single person dead in the country because of it. And I would argue that they had an ulterior motive because of the protests, that it wasn't entirely motivated out of public health. And we've also seen other countries like Sweden, for example, that have not gone the quarantine route, that have been able to successfully manage this pandemic, but we haven't seen the countries that have implemented lockdowns do that. And I think that's very telling, because that increasingly, as time has gone on, says to me that a lot of the government response isn't necessarily about public health, but more about testing the waters. What will people What will people take? And I think, a big part of the lockdown that's not being talked about, because a lot of people are rightly so focusing on the civil liberties aspect. I think that's very important, but also the economic side of things. This is going to be a huge economic revolution and wealth transfer, not a revolution in the sense of giving it to the power, economic, it being a people-driven revolution, but an elite-driven, Wall Street-driven revolution, I guess you could say, where this so-called relief bill was actually 4 times larger than the Wall Street bailouts for banks and other, imperiled industries, including companies like Boeing that had spent, tons of money on stock buybacks and just corruption in general at the expense of, regular everyday Americans. And they tell us to our face that it's coronavirus relief, while at the same time, these lockdowns are going to shut down small businesses and further inflate the largest corporations in the United States that are going to buy up the market shares of those small businesses that are closing down.
Yeah, well, that's I think there are a couple things I think here, that the economic ramifications, as you said, that in America and the rest of the world, but certainly we call ourselves a capitalism, this crony capitalism, but still America is driven by business. And we've already had record numbers of unemployment claims. There's no telling what the unemployment rates, fake or otherwise, they use the fake numbers that Trump called out in his campaign, but he's bragging about them now. But it could easily be 30% already past the Great Depression numbers. And if they keep this lockdown going into the summer, you may have half the population. I don't know how you bounce back from this. I mean, they don't seem to have, and that's, I think, what's mystifying to me. Maybe you can just speculate. I mean, I don't like to make predictions because I didn't see anything like this coming, but I don't see the end game here. And we can all say, okay, is this or how they're going to finally usher in world government, because individual countries won't be able to do it on their own. Business is going to be dead. You have to have state control. We're going to have mandatory vaccines that Bill Gates is drooling over in every public pronouncement he makes. He can't stop himself. I mean, what is the end game here? To me, they already had almost all the wealth, total power. Are they just playing a game to see, okay, if we want to do something, how fast will everyone comply? Because, and if so, I think they have their answer. They must be high-fiving themselves that, people rolled over literally and in record time. Look at what's happening I keep trying to say that this may be the last chance to make some kind of an effective protest. I can't believe that mass numbers of, especially fundamentalist Christians, of churches are not going to say, screw you, we're opening Easter Sunday and holding services. I haven't heard of any. And they arrested a bunch of people at some kind of a drive-through service the other day and fined them this is amazing, and people are taking it.
Well, I agree with a lot of the things you said. I think in terms of endgame, since we were just talking about economics earlier, I think one of the aspects of the economic endgame has to do with the fact that when you have large amounts of unemployed people, that creates dependency, in some cases, perhaps total dependency on the state for income and subsistence. And that, of course, makes it very difficult for people, if they're forced into that type of situation, to do things that the government, doesn't want, that the government can, lay out all these requirements of things you have to do in order to be able to receive your check. And we've also seen a lot of politicians, Republican and Democrat, bringing up this universal basic income idea that was first really brought into the public policy sphere most recently by Andrew Yang, who was running for the Democratic nomination, right? And I think, I think that also jives a bit with this vaccine agenda, where we're also seeing sort of these claims that, there's going to be a digital certificate, or we had Dr. Fauci of the coronavirus task force recently say that we need to have immunity papers. Americans need to carry papers proving their immunity to coronavirus, whether that's because they've recovered from it, or because they've received this treatment or vaccine, whatever it'll be, and that you will need those papers or that certificate, whatever it is, to be able to participate in the economy of that is coming, or receive that $1,200 to the check from the government if that gets extended, or if you want to attend public gatherings or anything like that in the future. I think they're letting us know what the plan is, what their plan is in the coming months, piece by piece. But the picture as a whole, as you said, just sort of spells out tyranny, and people did roll over for this. It's very disconcerting. It sort of reminds me of September 11th in a lot of ways, where, even if people are critical of the government, you have a situation that creates fear and panic, and people immediately look to the government as the way out, sort of, forgetting all of the distrust and anger that they held the government, maybe even days before this crisis really emerged in a big way on the national stage. And I think, that is a really unfortunate mentality, at least among Americans anyway, which historically have been rather distrustful of their government. And distrustful of federal power and centralized power. Hopefully that changes. I think as more and more of the hysteria wears off and the quarantines are extended, people may start waking up and questioning it a bit. But at this point, it's hard to really know, since people acquiesce so quickly. But we'll see what happens.
Yeah, I initially said many times that I thought they'd overplayed their hand, because this is something that was affecting me. And I know a doctor that had to say, I can't retire now because I lost everything in the stock market. I know somebody else that lost $200,000 in the stock market, and you have to have a lot of money to lose $200,000. Someone else lost 20%, had to delay retirement and so forth. So these are people that are doing well. The system's working for them. So this is impacting them. This isn't the thing that, goes after, like almost everything that happens in our society, especially adversely impacts the 80% or so of the, working class and poor people living paycheck to paycheck, don't have $400 in savings. You've seen all the stats out there. But this affects everyone below that 1%. And so I thought maybe we'd start seeing some business leaders, especially. I'm just shocked that the uniformity of opinion, it is like 9/11. No dissent was allowed, especially in the mainstream media. But I can't believe that not a single business leader stepped forward and said, this is ridiculous. You're gonna kill how many businesses doing this over something that is going to kill a fraction of what the flu kills every year? I mean, what are we looking at there? That are they being promised something? I don't understand how, as capitalists, where profit is everything, that these people aren't organizing and speaking out.
Well, going back to that 9/11 analogy, I think a lot of it has to do with how emotional people can become in response to arguments or even data or facts that don't really jive well with the official narrative that has been woven since the crisis event, in this case, the pandemic first revealed itself. And I think that has continued. Of course, that is greatly perpetuated by mass media, and who, for example, are focusing much more on the number of, deaths, which the government has admitted that it's basically overinflating, as opposed to, for example, the amount of unemployment claims. I mean, constantly it's this many cases, this many deaths. And, they've been caught using footage that is fake. I think there was one mainstream cable news outlet that was showing a mannequin on a respirator, claiming that was someone about to die from coronavirus.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think it's really crazy, especially considering that trust in mainstream media before this crisis was at an all-time low, and they got called out for doing a lot of ridiculous stuff. Like I think ABC News, showed a film of a Kentucky firing range and claimed it was Syria and that the Syrian government was bombing the poor rebels, but it was really something that had happened in Kentucky.
Yeah,
and now. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, and CBS, you're talking about this time, was caught and admitted that they used footage from Italy, a hospital in Italy, and claimed this was a hospital now in New York City. And nothing. This is what I don't understand. People, even good people, like from my JFK assassination research community, even some 9/11 people, that are skeptical, obviously, of a lot of things, but they trust this. And I think one part of it, Whitney, the reason why is that this is a technocracy-driven thing. And people that lack faith, especially on the left, you have to have there's that void will be filled by something. And they have a devotion to the scientific community, the medical community. I worked in the medical industrial complex, and if you work there, it's like eating at a restaurant. You're never going to eat there. The sausage being made is not a pretty sight. They're incredibly corrupt. And this narrative is being driven by the WHO and the CDC, both of which were caught lying in 2009 about doing what we think they're doing now, inflating the numbers of victims. They were both caught and we're still believing them. And now I think you've probably seen the WHO directive that we've been posting online everywhere that basically instructs hospitals that, hey, look, if you go ahead and conclude the death was from COVID, even if the testing is unavailable or inconclusive. I don't know how much clearer you can spell it out. So why would people trust these organizations? It's mind-boggling.
Yeah, I honestly personally don't know, but I am really cynical and skeptical about the motivations of these organizations. Speaking about the World Health Organization, I was really concerned when I saw this official. It was, I think, Tucker Carlson that actually highlighted this on his program, of this World Health Organization official saying that it's going to be necessary to go into people's homes and separate family members in case someone might have coronavirus. And this was actually, even before he said that, this actually appeared first from what I've seen on U.S. cable news, where it was on Rachel. It was a New York Times journalist speaking with Rachel Maddow. And they were talking about how it's going to be that the lockdown was just to freeze the pandemic in place. Now the real work begins. That's what this guy said. The real work begins, and we have to go into Americans' homes and separate families in case someone is sick. And then Rachel Maddow brought up these, what she called temporary hospitals for people with mild symptoms, where these people dragged out of their homes will be taken to by force. And this was framed as something that's good to fight the virus. And I just personally think that this, people are just panicking and not thinking clearly and are forgetting the history of situations like this historically that are not about keeping people healthy and safe. And even in recent years, U.S. government policy has not been focused on those things. It's been focused on expanding, surveillance, expanding power and control over its populace. I think this is something that governments around the world are increasingly concerned about. And I think that's why so many countries, not just the US, but a lot of countries in Europe, are basically doing a lot of things that China did, even though they often criticize the Chinese model, but are actually promoting a lot of things that are common in China as solutions to this virus. And that to me says that they're worried about people rising up and, demanding accountability and change for once. And I think, that may have been possible, maybe in the US, considering what happened on the Democratic side and people that are disillusioned with the system in general. And also with that relief bill, right? As I mentioned, after, comparing that to 2008, that being a much larger bailout than what happened then. And in 2008, those bailouts spawned the Occupy Wall Street protests. But now, even though they passed one that's 4 times more of a steal than that, more theft, everyone's on lockdown. So there will be no Occupy protest or an equivalent.
Well, and you hit the nail on the head when you said emotionally. This is such an emotional issue. I liken it to 9/11 or even the Holocaust. There's so many people that are emotionally invested in this. I've lost so many friends on social media and been called so many names. Danger. I've been called danger several times. And all I'm doing is just I'm expressing skepticism. I'm posting readily available videos, especially I'm sure you've probably seen Jason Goodman out in New York City and people like that have taken pictures with the empty hospitals, and it certainly doesn't look like they're overwhelmed. But people just get so emotional about this. Say, oh my, and I said, why are you so emotionally invested? Why are you so upset and offended by the thought that there might not be as many deaths as they're telling you? Wouldn't I don't understand that. What is the mindset? Is it because
I think the mindset is people saying our governments and these governments around the world would not lie to their people on such a massive scale. Yeah. I think that's honestly what they're thinking. And like I said earlier, that reflects this impulse to trust the government in times of panic and fear, and either forgetfulness or ignorance of the history of governments, not just in the US, but around the world, that have, increasingly authoritarian histories, and that, large governments, big government, large centralized power is tends towards tyranny always, right? So, I think that's the combination of things that are causing people to react that way, on top of the whole emotional response because of this, trauma. I would call it like trauma-based media is doing, because if you've noticed, they've made this comparison to 9/11 explicit in a different way than you and I are comparing it to 9/11. But they're saying things like, the coronavirus death toll just passed the 9/11 death toll. More Americans have died from this invisible enemy than died from 9/11. That is clearly an attempt to link in the American public's mind the trauma used promoted by mass media after 9/11 with the trauma being promoted by mass media in relation to coronavirus.
Yeah, and it's a totally emotionally driven narrative. This is identity politics at its finest or worst. I mean, everything that people are so emotionally invested in this, and you're right. 9/11, when Bush stood at ground zero, that was such an incredible moment, to some people. And then, of course, we saw things like with the Boston bombing, hashtag Boston Strong, where the entire city became credited in some weird way. I don't quite understand how that works with identity politics, but I see something coming out of this perhaps with, maybe New York City Strong or Cuomo Strong, or maybe, I don't know. Do you understand what I'm saying about because the emotion here is this, and people are not using reason. I think that's why we can't get through to them, because it's total emotion. How can you possibly say that? Oh my, and I've had people, like I said, that one guy interviewed me and loved me so much, and he deleted me. Several other people reviewed my books. They've deleted me just because of this. I don't know. Have you been losing friends? Or are you still as popular as ever?
Well, I don't know. I try and keep more focus on my work than my popularity, I guess. So I have had a decent increase in followers over time. But I think it's because I've been focusing mostly on civil liberties stuff, not necessarily about the data and statistics beyond just the general blanket statement that, I think pretty much all governments across the board are not being accurate with their data and are using it for, their own ends, whatever those may be. But I've definitely noticed, among alternative media, which was depressing personally, have really shied away from questioning the narrative or any stance that could be considered controversial in relation to this virus, trying to play it safe, for example. But what I've also noticed is that those outlets, independent outlets and independent journalists that have, sort of stood their ground and tried to remain objective and tried to look for the truth behind all the bullshit, I guess you could say, have actually seen a growth in views. Even videos that have been censored on YouTube and things like that have been doing really well in terms of their views and their ability to attract, to be shared and all of that. So I think, even though we may feel that there's a lot of pushback from some people, obviously, especially with social media, when we get a negative response, it tends to stay in our minds more than positive responses.
Well, you're right.
You get a couple negative comments, but you might get double or triple positive comments, but you'll, in your mind, remember the negative ones more. So I think it's important to keep that in mind. But I think generally speaking, there's a lot of people that know that something is really odd about what's going on and are trying to look for information that is honestly trying to sort through all of this to figure out what's really going on here.
Exactly. And I think you're right. And in my case, I have gotten a lot more supporters than I've lost. It's just some of the ones I lost were like, kind of there a while. And you're right. It kind of hurts even though you get a lot more new people. And I'm getting people saying all the time, thanks for speaking up. And I'm sure you get probably a lot more than that than I do. But people do appreciate it. But I think what we're really missing is that nobody with a public platform. Ron Paul is the biggest one I know. Ron Paul has been speaking up about it, but he's not in Congress anymore. And I guess this guy Massey in Congress seems to be talking a little bit, but I don't know anybody else with a public platform that is doubting this story. I mean, they seem to be playing politics. They're either blaming Trump or, crediting Trump. I mean, it's as usual. He's right in the middle of this, but it's very, very politicized. There's no question about it. If you watch Fox News, it's either China's fault or Obama's, and if you watch CNN and MSNBC, obviously it's just nonstop Trump bashing all the time. But we're almost to a break. I want to on the other side, I want to give you a chance to talk about the article you wrote that I read, and also the one that you're working on now, because you're focusing on a particular aspect of this, and there's so much here. Like you said, there's so many details that we could go into. So we're going to focus on that. And so we'll be right back with more Whitney Webb after these words.
Out of the airplane stepped Chamberlain with a condemned man stare. But we all cheered wildly. A photograph was taken as he waved a piece of paper in the air. Now
You're listening to the Truth Frequency Radio Network.
No hate, no hype. No fear.
I'm sick and tired of hearing things from uptight, short-sighted, narrow-minded hypocritics. All I want is the truth. Just give me some truth. I've had enough of reading things by neurotic, psychotic, pig-headed politicians. All I want is the truth. Just give me some truth. No short head, yellow belly, son of tricky dick. He's gonna mother of a top so meager, just a pocket full of holes. Money for dough, money for road.
And welcome back to Auto Protest. We're talking with the great Whitney Webb. Whitney, tell us, give us the details on what aspect of this case you're working on now.
Right now, I'm actually just about to finish it up. I'm doing an article that's just a quick look at the three companies that are said to be behind this new quote-unquote coronavirus surveillance system that is being led and promoted by Jared Kushner, who has his own parallel task force to the Mike Pence, President Trump task force, which is like the public sector task force. Kushner's is supposed to be an all private sector task force. And apparently at his behest and other administration officials, they were looking to create what they called a national coronavirus surveillance system that involves health records, the private health records of Americans. And it has obviously, concerns regarding privacy. That should be obvious. And was in the Politico article that first reported on this, they compared it to the Patriot Act. But for health, basically. So that's obviously a concern. And I just go over the three main companies that are on that are set to that are poised to be behind this system if it does go forward. That's because there were a couple of different offers that this Kushner-led team received. One was a company called Audacious Inquiry, but the one that is leading is led by Collective Medical Technologies. And a couple other companies like Juvair and another one whose name I'm currently blanking on. But basically, the three of these companies that are in this position Patient Ping, is the second one. So these three companies, if you actually look at them, Patient Ping, for example, their lead investor is Google Ventures. And Google Ventures in recent years has been co-investing to a large degree with In-Q-Tel, which is the CIA's venture capital arm. And In-Q-Tel in recent years has actually, for the past 5 years or so, I believe, has really been heavily promoting mass surveillance as a way of responding to global pandemics, basically using, creating the narrative that public health is, can be better served by mass surveillance systems of people's health records and private communications, which is, I think it's kind of concerning that a company like that is set to be involved in this type of venture. And the other one is led by a former executive at Bain Capital, which was, the private equity firm Mitt Romney. People that used to work at Bain Capital include Netanyahu of Israel and the current CEO of YouTube, among other people. And that company specifically has some other interesting ties to, government and also intelligence. They opened a 200, I forget the exact amount, but I think 200 million fund specifically per pandemic preparedness. And one of the people they brought on to help them was a former science advisor to the CIA. They also brought on Colin Powell as one of their strategic advisors. So, these are the companies that look like they will be behind the surveillance system, which is a little concerning to me, to put it mildly. And what's interesting, too, and what we're seeing with a lot of these quote unquote solutions that are being promoted by government right now is that actually a few months ago, before there was any talk of pandemic or even coronavirus, these same quote unquote solutions were being pushed through or rather promoted by the same people in government promoting them now, but under the guise of preventing mass shootings. Mm-hmm. And that because at that time, people in the U.S. were most afraid and concerned about mass shootings. Now, the fear that's most in vogue, I guess you could say, is the pandemic. So now they are pushing for those same solutions they've wanted this whole time, but changing it based on what Americans are currently most afraid of. So It's not just this mass surveillance system. It's also a system that was promoted by Attorney General William Barr last year to stop mass shootings, involving the end of encrypted messaging, in essentially pre-crime and indefinite detention of Americans. And as this coronavirus pandemic played out, we saw the Department of Justice, which is led by William Barr, ask for the right to, or ask for new emergency powers, including the ability to indefinitely detain Americans without trial. The fact that he was asking for last October as well and is now poised to get it as well, just really tells you that government has been looking for these solutions, which are obviously tyrannical, but they are trying to manipulate public opinion and get public consent for them by manipulating people's emotions and their panic and fear.
Yeah, and that's what happens with identity politics. Please save us. And you go back to Benjamin Franklin that warned back then when there were not really any fear mongers in the colonies, saying that you give up liberty for safety and you're going to end up with neither. And that's what we're doing. That's what they use all the time. And there's nothing more frightening to people than their health or the health of their parents or grandparents. That's nobody wants to see anyone get sick. So this is terrifying to them. And I don't know what else we can say because we show them the numbers. Why do you think? I don't. What really amazes me is that we know they've been fudging the numbers, as you mentioned. They've been caught constantly doing it. Was it Dr. Birx or whatever in the White House? Basically was quoted in the New York Post as saying, "Yeah, we're not doing it like some of the rest of the world. If somebody tests positive or they claim tested positive for this, then even though they died of terminal cancer or an automobile accident, we're going to list the cause of death as COVID. We're trying to pad the numbers." But I just am, find it mind-boggling that people, they're using, even with the padding of the numbers are nothing compared to a normal flu season even. How do you think they're selling this? They keep saying it's almost like Q. It reminds me of QAnon a little bit. Well, in the next 2 weeks, just wait. And now they've had to pull back their models significantly. I don't know if you noticed that Tucker Carlson, who I thought was one of the better people on TV for a while, but he had really participated in the fear porn along with everyone else. And a couple nights ago, it was like a switch turned. And suddenly they were saying some of the stuff we've been saying. Well, could they have been so wrong? So how do you think they're selling this when the numbers, I mean, why don't people ask what we're asking? Is it why we never shut anything down for the flu, even in the worst season, if it kills 80,000 people? Nothing was ever closed or canceled. Why is everything shut down? That's what I don't understand why people aren't asking themselves.
I think it's because people have consented to it, and it's because their perception of what is going on has been manipulated. They are mass media is intentionally not comparing the death figures of coronavirus to other causes of death, and that I guess you could say is lying of omission. With the intention of creating the perception and overinflating the threat of coronavirus, making people think that it's this cataclysmic threat, when really, if you objectively look at the numbers compared to other causes of death annually in the U.S., or the fact that people are constantly dying, it obviously makes that threat look lesser. But of course, if the threat diminished and it isn't as horrible and disastrous as we're being told to believe, and the government can't come and propose these tyrannical solutions, they need people to be willing to give up their liberties and their freedoms. And the only way to do that is to get people to acquiesce. And the way to get people to acquiesce and to have them give the government their consent here is to manipulate the perception of what's going on and to get them into a place of decision making that is emotional and fear based.
Oh, absolutely. But I'm not walking the walk either. I'm just talking the talk. But so I'm criticizing everybody. But they have made it very difficult to rebel against what they're doing because it's a game of numbers. I mean, I know from a couple. We have demonstrations in Washington D.C. whether it's Cindy Sheehan and Gerald Celente's Occupy Peace, or William Gein's Alapac for immigration movement. And every time they go, I don't go because I know what kind of crowd they're going to get. They're going to get, 50 people maybe. And you need at least tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, at one time in one place. And even then the media might ignore it. But so I don't know what we can do. We've really created a situation where people are, including me, I don't want to go get arrested or shot and be made an example out of. So it's like, how do we get people to back each other up? It's like I was always one of the more outspoken people always in my working life in meetings. I would and people would say they agree with you and they'd be silent. So I would be left out on the limbs like, hey, wait a minute, don't you guys agree? Nothing. So, if you can't even get people to speak up in a sales meeting like that, then how do you get people to organize any kind of effective resistance? And it's no accident. You're right. The Yellow Jackets in France were showing something to the rest of the world. Now they're gone. And I don't think it's an accident. This supposedly started in Wuhan. What happened to the Wuhan protesters?
Right. I think all of those are good points. And it's just, it's always harder to prescribe solutions because it seems like, these people behind all of this and doing all of this stuff seem to have the upper hand. It's always important that people that are critically thinking and thinking objectively don't give into that fear and don't lose hope about what's going on and consistently try and reach other people. But I think, in terms of protest possibilities, getting out on the street, Americans have been reticent to do that for decades. I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that after, during the Bush administration, protests against the Iraq war and some protests that were larger, including, in the beginning of the Obama administration, Occupy, they were relatively brutally crushed. They didn't change anything. So I think a lot of people became disaffected and disillusioned because of that. So, that I think is unfortunate, but I also think that, what people need to do, I guess, is that, well, if you're stuck at home, the answer, instead of asking people to do more, is to ask them to do less. What do I mean by that? You could do a general strike where people just don't work, or people could just withhold and not pay taxes, doing less. Much easier than asking people on a large scale to do more. Ask them to do less. I think that, is possible. But all of these things require organization. It's unfortunate that, the U.S. right now is so politically fragmented. and divided a lot of times around much smaller issues. But hopefully, as government overreach continues to extend and get more out of control, people will, be forced to wake up a little more. I think a lot of people before this happened too were so complacent because they were, even if things weren't good, they were getting by and things were quote unquote normal. Yeah. And so, they didn't really want to push back against the system if they were doing all right and scraping by or doing well, whatever. But now even people that are doing well, and especially people that weren't doing well but were doing okay before, are being put in a position that may become increasingly desperate as time goes on. And they may start to question what's going on, question these lockdowns, depending on how long they're extended. And then we might see real change. But I think for now, it's important to try and get the information out there. And despite this pressure that's being placed on skeptics, stand your ground, continue to make a fact-based analysis, continue to question government's motives, and the motives of other people that aren't necessarily in government, people like Bill Gates, oligarchs that have obvious, ulterior motives and agendas going on behind the scenes. Right. And continue to try and get that information out there while we still have a platform. People are still using social media. I would argue that because of quarantine, more people are using it than they were before, especially people that are without work. And, why we're still on there, because I think, there will be another mass deplatforming at some point. Pretty much already said that. A lot of these social media companies actually met with intelligence agencies last year, Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube, or rather Google. All met with intelligence agencies last year. Before this pandemic, they said it was to protect public discourse ahead of the election, but now they're saying that they have to take off content and they have to block people and remove accounts because they're threatening public health with, their questioning of narratives. But before that happens, I think it's important that we try and get this information out there, plant the seed in people's heads, so when they start to question and they stop thinking so emotionally, then they'll have a better perspective on the situation, especially if at that point, the deplatforming has happened and that information isn't as readily available as it is now.
Well, like I said, I didn't see this happening. I've been predicting, a lot of us, I've been at this a lot longer than you. You're really young. It's amazing what you're doing and accomplishing. I know you're young. And, but some of us have been talking about this. We talked about the, what was called the upright spike or the economic spike going back to the 80s. That the economy couldn't continue with the debt and the fraudulent counterfeit banking system we have, and having half the country basically having nothing, which we already had. Most people don't know the bottom 50% of Americans make less than $27,000. That was before this, and have less than 1% of the collective wealth. You're going to expand that to maybe 75% after this is over, and that's third world. Because you can't, without a middle class. That's what made America great. But will the middle class? How can the middle class, what was left of it, come back from this with all those business? What was left of small businesses? How can they stay alive for a month without any business?
I think by design they're not supposed to. I think this is about creating a United States of America that is essentially neo-feudalism, where there is a large underclass and a small group of technocratic elites that rule over us through a tyranny system. I think that is unfortunately what we are seeing them attempt to build. And I think it is just very, just a nightmare scenario. And I'm confident that as this advances, more and more people will wake up. Oftentimes in situations like this, it often seems like the quote unquote bad guys, whatever you want to refer to them as, are winning before it becomes revealed that they are actually losing. And I think it's important to keep in mind as well, especially talking about, the media, that the media tends to favor one narrative. They tend to report more on negative stories, focus more on the negative. A lot of positive things that are going on, for example, will likely not be reported on, even if they are happening, even if they're happening on a massive scale.
Yeah.
Just like you mentioned earlier, even if there is a big protest somewhere, if media doesn't report on it, most people don't know what happens, right? So I think it's important, in this time to sort of keep the faith, I guess you could say, whether you're religious or not. Yeah. But make sure that you within yourself, hold on to your faculties and realize that the reason government is doing this is because they are afraid of the people. They are afraid that people will demand their liberties back, and that the government will have to relinquish some of its control, which it obviously doesn't want to do. They are scared of the little guy, scared of the regular people. And that's why they're trying to push all of this through. And that is fundamentally because the people have power. You as an individual or a sovereign individual, you have power that the government doesn't want you to have. And like we were mentioning earlier about the manipulation of perception, they want you to feel that you do not have power. And it is very important just on the individual level that people remember that they do.
Yeah, exactly. And what really makes this different, although I think we're America turning third world and infrastructure and just the conditions that we have, economic disparity and so forth. But what is different than in typical a lot of third world countries, the public is, especially if they have a dictator, a tin pot dictator like installed by the CIA or something, the public is relatively free as long as they don't mess with them. I mean, they have, granted, now they may not have much money. The wealth disparity is still there, but I go back to 1984 and Orwell and the proles. We're basically the proles. And if you remember, Orwell, Winston Smith says over and over again, if there's any hope, it lies in the proles because of the numbers. But the proles were relatively free. They were the only people in Oceania that was free. That were free. They were allowed to, go but all they cared about was their sports and their lotteries and their drinking, which does it sound familiar? And but so we're like the proles. We outnumber them, thousands to one. I know I'm asking you a question like you can answer it, but I'm hopeful that somehow maybe they eventually do wake up. But otherwise, what do you think? I know I can't make predictions. What do you think America's going to look? You have any idea, let's say come election time, November, what will America look like? Will it even resemble anything that we've known in the past, or will it be a completely different country?
Well, actually, I'm glad you brought up the election timing. I did a report in January before this stuff really even exploded, but I did most of the research at the end of November and December before, even this was really known to be going on in China. And I was noting that there were tons of reports late last year, a lot of them citing U.S. intelligence officials or just U.S. government officials that were essentially saying that there is not going to be a 2020 election. It is going to be canceled. Something horrible is going to happen, and the election will not happen. And to me, having intelligence basically that narrative so long in advance before any of this we're seeing now. And now it's, become pretty common for people in media to speculate that it won't be happening. We already have the Democratic National Convention has been delayed and may just be postponed entirely. We have people also talking about the general election being postponed entirely. I think it's very concerning that U.S. intelligence was seeding that narrative back then at a time, according to recent reports anyway, when they had already identified coronavirus last November as a potentially, quote unquote, cataclysmic threat that's supposedly from this Defense Intelligence Agency document that was reported on by ABC, I think just a couple days ago. So I think it shows some disturbing pre-planning. Let's remember, too, that last year, Event 201 has gotten some attention. That was this coronavirus pandemic simulation that was led by this Center of Johns Hopkins Health Security that is basically tied to the bioweapons military complex of the United States that I talk about in a series that I started recently, along with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and the World Economic Forum or the Davos Economic Elite. But there was also a series of simulations that was conducted by the U.S. government called Crimson Contagion. It was a series of 4 simulations, 19 federal agencies, 12 states, and their private sector partners. And these were massive exercises that talked about tons of things and identified tons of issues that would come up in a government response to a pandemic, all of which we ended up seeing. This wasn't, in my opinion, especially given the fact that there are still classified coronavirus response plans that are still classified, but were prepared back in January by the military and the intelligence community. I think there was an intention to milk this crisis for the benefit of our unelected leadership in the U.S., which essentially is intelligence in the military in a lot of ways. The people that stay in power regardless of who is president. The deep state, a lot of people like to call it, but I tend to shy away from that term now just because how it's been, used by groups like QAnon and whatever in sort of cartoonish way. And anyone who they think is out to get Trump is deep state or whatever. But there definitely are unelected leadership in the country. And like you mentioned, like the Kennedy assassination in the 60s, right? Really, you could argue since then that, the real rulers of the U.S. government have been these unelected intelligence agencies and military intelligence agencies.
What did you make of, and I, again, as a Kennedy guy, and as a, obviously as somebody who, I do think almost everything is a conspiracy, because I think we're being run by conspirators. This is what they do. This is standard operating procedure for them. They don't know any other way to do business. What did you think of the latest Kennedy death? Robert F. Kennedy's granddaughter.
It's always hard to know, especially considering that one of Robert F. Kennedy's children is very vocal against the vaccine agenda, critical of Bill Gates. It is concerning. Of course, the Robert F. Kennedy assassination itself, it gets a lot less attention than the John F. Kennedy assassination, but also involved many of the same players. Very, very concerning event, and its impact on American political history, very significant. So I think, and every time there's a Kennedy death, people stop and pause, and I think, that's warranted, but it's unfortunate that happened. I don't really know, the details of it though, so I can't comment on the specifics of that case.
Quickly, in case you didn't know, she was, the woman who drowned, which we've been to RFK's, niece, I guess. RFK Jr. is the guy that's outspoken about vaccines. She supposedly went out on a canoe to the Chesapeake Bay on a canoe, choppy waters, to retrieve her 10-year-old son's ball. Kennedys couldn't afford another ball, but her job was, she is the director of a global health initiative out of Georgetown University. I found her titles, very, very odd considering what's going on, and especially the timing. But it's just something, it's out there to look into. But I want to give you the last few minutes to make sure to talk about anything you want to talk about, promote what you want to talk about, and just tell us what we need to know.
All right, sure. Well, I sort of mentioned earlier that I started this new investigative series. It's called Engineering Contagion. Basically, it's talking about these simulations that I just touched on, the Crimson Contagion U.S. government series of simulation, 4 of them from January of last year to August of last year. Those took place. And then Event 201, there are major players in both exercises that have in common a very disturbing exercise that was a similar scenario, I guess you could say, that took place in June 2001, that in a lot of ways eerily predicted the anthrax attacks that would take place 3 months later, that were initially blamed on a foreign source but turned out to be domestic, and the actual perpetrators of that crime have never been found. The lead investigator of the FBI that looked into the anthrax attacks resigned and filed a whistleblower lawsuit in 2006 saying the investigation was a sham. A few years after that, the FBI blamed this guy, Bruce Ivins, who died before the FBI's case against him could go to trial. He said that he allegedly committed suicide. There was no suicide note. They never performed an autopsy, and the FBI somehow didn't know that he was in a drug-induced coma from allegedly ingesting all of these pills, even though he was under 24-hour surveillance, among other things. But the fact that the people that were tied to that exercise, which was essentially a dry run in a lot of ways for the anthrax attacks, is significant because the people that participated in that exercise, a lot of them went on to have obvious, I would say, foreknowledge that the anthrax attacks were on their way in the aftermath of September 11th, immediate aftermath of September 11th. Some of those participants were telling people in the Bush administration to take medication that would prevent anthrax infection. They were going on cable news and saying an anthrax attack was going to be committed by Al-Qaeda working hand in glove with Saddam Hussein. Saddam Hussein had anthrax. All of this we know to be a lie. And then the anthrax attacks happened. And there are a lot of disturbing overlaps between that simulation and what ended up actually happening. And it's fascinating and also very disturbing that a lot of those same players participated in these simulations predicting global pandemics last year on the U.S. government level, and also in this Event 201. And some of those people are actually currently involved in the U.S. government's coronavirus response in drafting some of these tyrannical solutions that we've been talking about. So anyone that's interested in that series, please go to thelastamericanvagabond.com, where I am publishing it. As I said, it's called Engineering Contagion.
Wonderful. And absolutely great information. Whitney Webb, you're doing wonderful work out there.
Hi.
Stay safe.
My name is Ella.
This is Truth Frequency Radio.
The wicked ones obviously under heavy Masonic influence.
Welcome back to Higher Protest. Donald Jeffries with you here. Usually I don't have two guests. I usually kind of rant and rave and comment myself and go interact with the chat room in the second half of the show. But the circumstances around us with this pandemic, whatever you want to call it, that's going on, that's taken over all our lives, are so important that I want to have another great guest. So okay, I'm sorry, I'm looking at messages here at the same time. We have Dr. Andy Kaufman here, and he is a natural healing consultant, inventor, public speaker, forensic psychiatrist, expert witness, published lots of articles, educated at places MIT, way too long for me to read the entire introduction here. But and I understand he didn't know this was a live show, but it'll be fine. Don't worry. Dr. Kaufman, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Don. Glad to be here.
No, I'm glad to have you. And this will be an hour. I hope you can stay for an hour. If you have to leave before that, just let me. If you want to break it off after half an hour or something, that's fine. But if you can stay the whole hour, I'm sure the audience would love to hear you, because you've been talking a lot about this and doing lots of great interviews about it. So tell us how did you, as a member of what I call the medical industrial complex, I worked for it my entire life, and not a big fan of it, but I love renegades like you that are out there criticizing, because this is a technocracy-driven thing, and it's being driven by WHO and CDC. How did you become a skeptic about this, or were you already a skeptic and just kind of prone to doubt like I am?
Well, I think skepticism is a very important part of reasoning. When you hear new ideas, it's always important to say, does that make sense to me? What's the evidence to back it up? And I think I always just naturally had that orientation. And when I began practicing medicine, in medical school, there's so much to learn that you can't really step back and think about anything at all. So I got through that, and then I started in my residency where I was training in psychiatry. This was at Duke, and I started working with patients. And I began noticing that giving them psychiatric medications did not really help them get better. In fact, they pretty much mostly stayed miserable. There were some effects, like antipsychotic drugs in about 40% of the people can decrease the voices that they hear. It certainly doesn't improve their life that much that they can, go back to full functioning. And in manic episodes, which is pretty unusual, actually, it's a lot less common than people are led to believe. I saw that you could use almost any kind of drug that would make them sleep, and they would, after a period of sleeping and being sedated, they would get back to totally normal. But aside from those rare situations, all of the antidepressants and anxiety medications didn't seem to do anything helpful for the people I was working with. So I started looking into the literature. And there was a very important paper that came out when a scientist put in a Freedom of Information Act to the FDA to get all of the studies that were submitted for an antidepressant. And this is really important because when a drug company sponsors studies to approve one of their drugs, they only publish the articles that show a positive effect of their drug. If they do studies that show no benefit, they just put those in their files. But they have to include those when they submit for an FDA application. So this scientist who got those documents through a Freedom of Information Act, he then combined all the results with the unpublished and the published studies for that drug. and showed basically that the difference between the placebo group and the treatment group, so the people that got a sugar pill versus the ones that got the actual drug, was on the order of like 1 or 2%. So in other words, not significant enough to show any difference at all between the placebo and the drug.
Yeah.
So I was quite astonished. And immediately I said to myself, wow, this drug should be taken off the market. How did it even get approved? And pretty much all the other people, this was in like a journal club, so we were discussing this article, and all the other people were kind of thinking the same thing. But the authors didn't conclude that. And in fact, after that, all of our supervisors expected us to continue prescribing that drug, even though it's shown not to work. And this was a real big clue to me. Why would we be continuing to do something that there's clear evidence is not effective? And I started looking at things differently from that point. And I certainly began to, as soon as I could, prescribe less drugs. When I was in my training and I was being supervised, I had to prescribe the drugs, or else I was going to be, fail out or something. They wouldn't let me go on. But once I was in practice for myself, I realized that certain places I worked, really all they were looking for was a prescriber. They didn't really want you to spend time getting to know a person's story and figuring out what are the influences that caused them to be so miserable. Very frustrating, and not what I wanted to do when I went into medicine. So I basically started separating myself out of clinical medicine one step at a time. I got involved in research. I got involved in academic leadership. I even started up a company with a medical device that I invented and got patented. And eventually, I started studying other types of healing outside of allopathic medicine. And ever since the first client that I worked with using these methods, which mostly involves nutrition and cleansing, it was the first time any patient I ever worked with anxiety was completely cured.
Mm-hmm. That's well. If I could, it's obviously you're into more natural healing, which is wonderful. I can certainly relate to that a lot. Probably almost everybody listening to the show probably is taking as many vitamins as they can and supplements. But when you first started, what made you and of course I'm getting comments in the chat room. This guy's a psychiatrist. I knew you were before I had you on the show, but I think it's relevant because I want to talk about the psychological and emotional aspect of what's being done to our society. Just the social distancing stuff. How is this, from a psychiatric point of view, what is this going to mean for human relationships in the future? Are young people going to be scared to embrace? I mean, I don't know if you saw that Dr. Fauci, who is like Dr. Strangelove or something. He's saying we should never go back to shaking hands. This is unbelievable. The massive change they're taking. I mean, what doesn't that, as a psychiatrist? I mean, what is this for? I mean, we're already dysfunctional as we are, and so many of us are walking around with issues. What is this going to mean if we're scared to interact with each other? Neighbors reporting each other, and people getting tickets for being too close. I mean, what are we doing here?
Yeah, well, obviously this is going to have devastating effects, which I'll highlight. But I just want to mention Dr. Fauci because he might be saying those things to the general public, but he wrote an editorial in the New England Journal of Medicine a week or two ago. And in that editorial, he said that COVID-19 is essentially the same as a typical seasonal flu and will have a mortality rate of 0.1%, just like the flu. Yeah. So that's what he's saying to other doctors, and that's his real opinion. And the other stuff he's saying is motivated by something else, which, I don't know for certain, but I do have some ideas. But this social distancing and house arrest policy is really, really alienating us from each other. We are social animals. We naturally live in groups and communities. We have our nuclear family, and we have the larger community, and we have our extended family. And this is the natural way for us to live. And we rely upon that, upon the communication and cooperation in order to survive. We're not solitary creatures like, say, a leopard might be. That's not our nature. So in my opinion, the mask is actually one of the most dangerous things. And, let's put aside for a moment that actually a mask wouldn't even do anything, even if there was a real virus, because the pore size of the mask is 10 to 100 times larger than the alleged viral particle. So it would be like if you walked through a door that was 100 feet high and 100 feet wide. Certainly the door would not stop you. But the mask is really vital because our faces have like over 100 different muscles so that we can make all of these expressions. And this is one of the major mechanisms that allow us to communicate with each other without language. And you know that you just can see someone's face and they have that one look and you know exactly what it means. You even feel it. So when you cover up your face with a mask, what happens is that you cannot read those emotional expressions. And that means communication is very limited. And it also is like putting a barrier between you and the other person. And then, of course, combine that with the distance and people being afraid of each other. I mean, that's what is really the fundamental thing. We're being afraid of each other. And right. It's natural to be afraid of people wearing a mask because, generally speaking, when people wear masks, they're up to no good, right? They're committing a crime, so they don't get identified. And so we're told to be afraid of each other because we could get each other sick. And then we see other people wearing these masks and we're conditioned to hate of people in masks. So this is, it's like coming at us from all sides. And when we start to be afraid of each other, how can we have relationships with each other?
Exactly, and think of it because this we're told the elderly, and naturally the elderly probably are most at risk for almost anything, but are most at risk here, and they would be from the flu as well. And already, I'm sure you know this. It's so sad when someone's in a nursing home or they're not getting many visitors. I've known people there. Unfortunately, even their families kind of tend to forget them all too often. The average person doesn't get anywhere near the visitors they would like to. Now they're not getting any. So how many old people are just gonna, because they're maybe in their 90s or something, and they may just die and not see anybody for a couple months because of this, and maybe the stress and what is the emotional impact on people like that?
Yeah, well, that's a good point, and it reminds me of this very interesting study of nursing home residents, where what they did was they gave the nursing home residents a plant, and they had two groups. A group of the plant, the nursing home staff came in and took care of the plant. The other group, they asked the nursing home resident to care for their own plant. And what they found was that the residents that cared for their own plant actually outlived the other residents. Yep. And this is because they had something to take care of. And it was another life. In this case, it was the life of a plant, which is less significant than the life of another person from our perspective, but still significant. So I think that you can draw parallels between that and the social isolation in terms of how long they might live, because if they don't have a reason to go on, someone to take care of, like their grandchild to teach a lesson to or give a present or something that they made at the nursing, and the purpose of life goes away. And that's extremely devastating.
Yeah, and that's just one, just one aspect of the, things like dating is now impossible. I guess they haven't got to the point where if you're inside the same house, you should be okay. But I don't know if you saw in Colorado the other day where the police came up to a father in the park and I think fined him because he was too close to his daughter. What are we doing here? That doesn't even make sense because obviously they live in the same house. So what is the rationale there? I don't understand how they're selling this. And I tell you, Dr. Kaufman, what I'm harping on all the time, you see my post on Facebook, so you know it, is that I'm just astounded that this was like a thief in the night, to quote the Bible. This came on us, and I'm not talking about the virus, I'm talking about the response. And within a couple weeks, almost every government was able to lock down their citizens in the entire world, maybe except for. We got some music going on there? Okay.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. That's my cell phone in the other room. Would you like me to take care of it, or it'll stop in a minute?
Yeah, it'll stop. That's fine. But so how did we possibly go from we weren't free before. People like me, that's all I write about is how tyrannical our leaders are. But even I can't believe that everyone rolled over on this. And I'm just amazed. I've been called dangerous and all kinds of names on social media just for posting these links, to empty hospitals and, statements by CDC and at WHO that show that they're, fudging the stats and inflating the numbers. What are we, why do you think, what does that say about us that we are so docile? Oh, and I'm thinking it's just Americans, but almost the whole world is doing this. So why are we submissive? Is it because it's a technocracy and people have such faith now in science and medicine that they're willing to listen to them more than they would a politician or a religious leader?
Well, I think there's a combination of factors leading up to here. I mean, we're conditioned from our earliest, experiences to trust authority, right? All of the programming that goes on in compulsory schooling is all about obeying authority, right? You have to sit still in your chair for the entire length of the period. And if you're unable to do that, you're going to either get in trouble or someone's going to force you to take some medication that's going to turn you into a zombie. So you sit there quietly. And so we all learn this lesson. And so people generally do what they're told and don't question things. And I'll tell you that in my neighborhood, people were actually voluntarily taking some of these measures before they were even any fines or any requirements. And what I think the biggest factor is fear, that people are acting out of fear. They're told there's a boogeyman out there and that other people are going to give it to them. And so they basically take action. I mean, imagine if you were, during the Cold War, there was a very similar kind of process that occurred. They were told that, any time Russia would be firing nuclear weapons at us. And so people had all these bomb shelters and they had drills with siren raids. And people, went underground immediately because they were fear for their life. And fear, when it's fear of survival, that's an extremely strong motivator. So if you can create a situation to make everyone afraid, they'll basically do almost anything you ask if it has the possibility of alleviating that fear or reducing the risk of whatever they're afraid of. And in this case, that fear has stopped people from looking at the actual information. Because if they just looked at one thing, just looked at how many people have died, and we can talk about how they have been instructed to inflate those numbers and blame a lot of unrelated deaths on this COVID-19. But even if you just accept that the death numbers are accurate, you can see that essentially there's no more people that died this year than last year. And the numbers are way lower than even the regular flu. So if we don't have to lock in our houses and wear masks and stay away from other people for the regular flu, then why do we have to do this now? Exactly. It doesn't make sense.
No, it doesn't. And I want to answer Adam Fitzgerald in the chat room, who is saying, why would you have a psychiatrist on if a viral outbreak? As again, I've mentioned, well, first of all, let's who's qualified and who's not qualified, because I've talked about this on, so you're just you're just a writer, you're somebody in the internet. Well, who is Bill Gates? Bill Gates has no scientific training. He's a computer thief and monopolist, basically, and a eugenicist, a dangerous individual in my book. But he is not a doctor. Certainly knows, the only thing he knows about viruses are his crappy computer operating systems, which are full of them. But other than that, he has no experience at all, and yet he's the point man here. So obviously, Dr. Kaufman is, because there is a psychological element here, as we talked about. So this is basically a huge mind F that's going on, I think, on people. They're reacting emotionally to it. But who cares about Bill Gates? I'm drawing the comparison here that he's obviously, and he's looking at this the way a lot of us are looking at it. Even if he wasn't a doctor, you're noticing the same things we're noticing, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, this is a really important point to address because, part of what I was talking about before about trusting authority has to do with trusting experts, right? So the government often parades these people that they call experts in a certain field, and maybe they have achieved something in that field. but that doesn't mean that their knowledge is inaccessible to the rest of us. So I certainly have done molecular biology research in a laboratory at MIT and several other kinds of research. I've run my own statistics, but that doesn't really matter. What matters is that I'm a human being and I'm capable of thinking for myself. And if I decide to spend the time actually looking at the research and trying to understand it and looking up words that I don't know, then I can figure out what's going on. And I certainly do have a lot of training on how to critically look at a scientific paper. And that's really where I've been getting my information from, scientific papers and from government websites. So I'm looking at the policy that they're stating right in their own documents to figure this out. And I want to encourage the listeners, including whoever asked that question, that you should also go and look at this material for yourself and try to figure out for yourself what's going on. I think we all have that responsibility. If we just trust in a designated expert to tell us the information, how do we know that person is honest? How do we know that person is not compromised? How do we know that they didn't make a mistake in logic? And I'll take this one step further, because if the so-called expert who's designated is the one that we're getting our information from, they have learned everything within the context of the system. So if you're a virologist, for example, and you want to go to graduate school to get your PhD in virology and get a postdoc after that, and then get a job either at a university or perhaps at a pharmaceutical or biotech company, and you question germ theory, or basically the theory that viruses cause disease, well, do you think that they're going to promote you and let you graduate? Because all of their research is based around germ theory. Right. So there's really no opportunity in a traditional academic training to question the underlying premises. And I had the same experience in medical school. We certainly learned a lot about viruses and bacteria, and we were even told about Koch's postulates, which is just a simple set of 4 rules of how you would experimentally prove that any microorganism causes an illness. But we were told about Koch's postulates, but we were never shown any evidence that any of these illnesses met Koch's postulates. We were just told, here's this disease, it's caused by this bacteria, here's this other disease, it's caused by this virus. And no one, not a person out of the 1,000 people in my medical school class questioned this and said, hey, can you show us the paper where they prove this? Because we were overwhelmed with too much information. And of course, we already knew that viruses cause disease because we'd been told that since we were little kids. So being an outsider of that system and not a designated expert gives you the opportunity to look at the information and the research with just curiosity. Like, I wonder what the proof is for that. I wonder what it shows.
Well, and people pick and choose what virologist to choose as well. I've talked about, I'd love to have him on the show, but he doesn't speak English. Kind of be hard to do live radio with a German speaker. And that's Dr. Wolfgang Warhawk. I'm sure you've heard of him. And he has some great videos out there. He's a virologist, and he analyzed what he said of the various strains of this COVID and coronavirus. And I don't. But I know that I believe you're in the same league with John Rappaport, who's not a doctor, who I respect very much, who also I think is skeptical of viruses as well as the whole virus theory. And he was on the show last month, and he was the first one to tell me that they were including presumptive cases into the mix. And now they're all admitting that's what they've been doing all along. So you pick and choose who you want, and then you know what you're talking about, and so what do you know about that?
Well, listen, the only reason that I would ask to cut this interview short is so that I can go and read more papers, because I want to get to the full bottom of this, and I want to present incontroversial evidence that there's no coronavirus that has ever been identified as a cause of disease. So that's a really important thing. And, since you brought up a German virologist, I think it's worth mentioning Stefan Lanka, because Stefan Lanka is a very successful virologist, and he actually discovered a virus, and he really discovered it. Like, he met the full criteria in his experimentation, whereas he purified and isolated and purified a virus and was able to characterize it as a distinct purified entity. But this virus that he discovered was actually in sea algae. And not in higher organisms. But after he made that discovery and had a lot of success in his career, he decided he wanted to focus on the viruses that cause human disease. And so he began looking at the background research to figure out what his angle would be, what he wanted to investigate. And he discovered that there were no papers showing that these viruses existed or caused the disease. And he took it into the public, actually, which was a very interesting move and a challenge. And he did this for measles. And he said, if anyone can prove through scientific papers, and he laid out the criteria, which would be the same scientific criteria that anyone would have, and asked for any challenge, and he offered a $100,000 reward. Well, some people did try this challenge, and in Dr. Lanka's opinion, nobody met the criteria. But this one gentleman thought he met it and sued him in court. And this actually went up to the German Supreme Court, interestingly, and they had to get expert scientists in order to give their opinion and weigh into the court, because the judge was not really capable or maybe didn't feel comfortable making the decision. And it turns out that the Supreme Court ruled in favor of Dr. Lanka. So basically, the German Supreme Court has proven that there's no measles virus.
Can you hold that thought for a second? Because I hope, can you come back after the break? I hope so.
Yeah, sure, I can come back.
Okay, we'll be right back into these words.
But we all cheered wildly. A photograph was taken as you waved a piece of paper in the air.
No hate, no hype, no fear. We are DFR, your protection from deception.
Coming down the street, coming right down the middle. We gotta keep the beat, but as blue as the ocean, how the sun shines down.
And welcome back to I Protest. We're talking to Dr. Andrew Kaufman. Before we get back to the conversation, I just want to shout out to the people in the chat room. Friendly Creation, Sophia, fellow host Lucky. Good to see you here, Lucky. The wonderful Bam, Melissa Taylor, too. And what I have to ask you sometime, where is Melissa Taylor 1 here? Why you have the 2 there? Melissa Taylor 2. CJ Rich, Cold Brews, Paradoxical Anomaly, Low IQ, my old friend Salamo, DJ Caveman, Gemini, Andrian Z, and Kev Baker is a fellow host here as well. So thanks everybody for enjoying the conversation. We're talking about obviously the all-important virus issue, or is it? That has taken over our lives. And I'm very skeptical, and not having any medical training, but I'm skeptical particularly of this virus, Dr. Kaufman, because again, talking to John Rappaport and looking at the research of others, I don't think. Maybe you can testify to that. I know you think the whole viral theory is wrong, which I certainly wouldn't doubt. I don't think much about the medical profession really should garner our trust at this point. But what do you say about the idea? My belief is that all these celebrities in particular that are testing positive, they're always reporting that they test positive for coronavirus. Now, my understanding is the coronavirus has been around for decades. If you look at the back of your Lysol can, it says, protects you from human coronavirus. This is a particular strand, 19 for 2019. I don't think they can isolate a particular strand like that, and that's why they're saying they're testing positive for coronavirus, which to me is meaningless. I mean, am I off base there in thinking that?
Well, I'll tell you, it's really hard to know. It certainly is a little bit of a warning sign that they're using that terminology. And, ever since medical school, I was taught that about half of the common cold illnesses are due to coronavirus.
Yes, yes.
So this is something that is pervasive. And certainly, I'll tell you that there's the test that they've developed for this is not accurate at all because there's no gold standard to compare it to. In other words, they didn't actually isolate any virus out of sick people and then compare the results of their testing. The testing is just for genetic material that they have not shown where it comes from. They only say that it is what it is by comparing the sequence with other coronavirus. They also didn't isolate and prove cause any disease. So it's really hard to know what exactly the test is testing for. But certainly it's possible that it could show quite a variety of things. The interesting thing I've found about all the celebrities who are saying that they're positive or whatever is that none of them are ill. They all seem to just maybe have a cold. And if there's any new disease at all, it certainly is not causing any excess mortality. So it's not something that is serious.
Yeah, exactly. And I find also the kind of celebrities getting to be Mr. I think we could have all predicted Greta Thunberg would come in there. Certainly Tom Hanks, his old Hollywood hack, and Prince Charles. But I don't know if you saw the story, and I posted on Facebook. J.K. Rowling, who's another, these are all attention whores in my opinion. She's very big on Twitter, constantly attacking Trump and so forth. But she announced, I don't know if you saw that story, but the way they acted as if she recovered from this. But if you look at the story, she had all the symptoms, but was never tested. So what a meaningless, that's like any of us saying, I recovered from something, it's never proven I had. Did you catch that story?
Well, I'm not really following celebrity stories. I'm trying to look at the science and the hard facts. But there is so much uncertainty. I mean, we have the CDC has put out a guidance for how to fill out a death certificate. And they say, they use the word in there, suspect. If you suspect it's a case of COVID-19, you're supposed to put that as the cause of death. Now, on a death certificate, the cause of death, that's a definitive assessment. That means that caused the death. It doesn't mean there was suspicion that caused the death. So I've even heard from someone I know a firsthand account of someone in the Midwest, I want to say Minnesota, but I can't be positive, who was a young man who had been battling with cancer for a while and was at the end stages. And this person died yesterday. And on the death certificate, they wrote COVID-19 as the cause. Yeah. So it's really confusing. Why would the government tell us to do this? I used to work early in my career, before I went to medical school. I worked as what's called a public health advisor, and it was a CDC-sponsored position. So I had to have special training that they decide upon, but it was working for the New York City Health Department. And I was, my job was to go around to hospitals and clinics around the city, do medical records to see if there were AIDS cases. And there were very, very specific criteria that had to be met to do that because they did not want to have errors in the data. They wanted to have accurate numbers. And so I learned so much medicine there because, trying to read through these charts and find, specific lab evidence for each different illness was quite challenging and rigorous. So comparing that to now, where the same organization, the CDC, is basically saying, well, anyone who dies, you should definitely think, did COVID-19 cause it? And if they had respiratory symptoms and you don't know what caused it, you should just put COVID-19. And they've even said that if someone dies and you suspected that and they never had a test, don't even do a test. Just put COVID-19 as the cause of death. Yeah. So this is going to, massively inflate the mortality data. And this is why I only look at the overall or total mortality. Because you'd see, if you wanted to create a fear of a pandemic without a real disease, because it would require a lot of effort and technology, and I'm not sure that it's even possible to create a disease that would spread around the world, to be honest with you. But if you wanted to create the appearance of that, well, you could simply take the people who die of any cause and put the label of the illness on there, and then you have the appearance that people are dying of this illness. And it would be very hard to overturn, because on the news media, they would only be reporting that number. In other words, they wouldn't say that, oh, deaths from lung cancer have dropped tremendously this year.
Yeah.
Because we're calling lung cancer COVID-19, or deaths from pneumonia have dropped this year, calling them COVID-19.
Well, you mentioned pneumonia, and I don't know if you saw that or not, but deaths from both pneumonia and from the common flu are down significantly this year. And I wonder if that's an accident, or if these COVID deaths are making the difference up there.
Right. Well, I can tell you that I did look at the numbers of flu deaths as of the beginning of February, and it was at 30,000 at that point. And, a couple of years ago in 17-18, there were 80,000 deaths from the flu.
Yeah.
So 30,000 in February is going to be less of a severe season than that. That was a particularly severe season. But it's on par to reach about 40 or 50,000 by the end of the number based on a typical progression. So I can't say definitively the answer to your question, but you can easily look at the week-by-week numbers from the CDC, because every week they put out mortality statistics, and they actually combine influenza and pneumonia into one data point, and you have to get like a spreadsheet to separate them out. But if you just look at that, you can see when did it start dropping, and you can time that with the guidance from the CDC about how to fill out these death certificates, which came out in, I think, early March. They had a preliminary guidance, and then right in the beginning of April, they had the definitive full document. So if you could time the drop in those cases to those instructions, then it would be pretty easy to see that what's happening is we're just changing the labels on the same people with the same illness. And this is why I look at the total mortality, because if you look at the total number of people who died and compare that to previous years, and there are several organizations that do this on a regular basis, like there's one called MOMO that does it in Europe, then you can see if there's any more people dying from any cause this year compared to years. And that data has not shown any excess mortality. So in other words, there's not even a signal that there's a new illness.
Yeah, and that's what's the most amazing thing about this. And I have a question for you from the chat room. Low IQ asks, if viruses don't exist, why do we have a dozen dual-use research and weapons BSL-4 biolabs?
Well, I don't know what they're doing in those biolabs. So without knowing that, I really can't answer the question. But it's kind of problematic to say that viruses don't exist, because you have to have a definition for what a virus is. And the word originally comes from Latin, and it means a poison or noxious substance. And long before there was any microscopic biology, so before they even knew that microbes like bacteria or fungi or anything else even existed, they had this idea of a virus, that it was some poison that caused disease. And the first time they ever saw something that they called a virus under the microscope, they were looking for the cause of a disease. And they had this theory that there was something smaller than a bacteria that was causing it. And they referred to that as a virus, even before they saw anything under the microscope that they could see what it was. So since they looked at it this way the whole time, they never really questioned what it is, because they assumed that it causes disease. But they didn't do the experiments that would prove that definitively, which would simply be isolating the virus from a sick person with a known illness, a set of symptoms like pneumonia, and not being able to isolate it from someone who is healthy, and then purify that particle that they think causes the disease, and then give it to a healthy person and show that it causes the same disease in the person. And that's pretty common sense, but it's never been done. So in my research, I discovered something called exosomes. And exosomes were never talked about or discovered when viruses were first researched. It wasn't until about 30 years ago. And when they discovered this, it was basically they were looking at viruses, but they found these particles that were identical to the virus, but they somehow observed that they came from our own cells. And that field of research has exploded since that time. And it's been discovered that these particles actually are the opposite of a poison. They actually help us heal. They communicate between remote parts of the body, and they can even gobble up toxic substances, which have been shown experimentally, so that they don't damage our own cells. And if you start looking at microscope images and viruses, you'll see that they're virtually identical. And if you start looking at the composition of the structure of these particles, you'll see that they have the same elements that the viruses have. And if you look at the genetic material that they carry, you'll see that there are various different kinds. They can have double-stranded DNA, single-stranded DNA, RNA, messenger RNA, microRNA, and all of those types of genetic material have been found in both viruses and exosomes. So it seems to me that if you started from scratch with this line of research and observed these tiny particles under the microscope without having any preconceived ideas of what they were, and just said, well, I want to figure out what these are, so I'll do some experiments to try and test different hypotheses that I have. I think what would have happened then is that they would have called these things exosomes from the beginning, and that we wouldn't currently call anything a virus at all. We would call them exosomes, or someone would have coined another term for them, because you can't call them a poison if they actually are the opposite of a poison and they remove poison from your body. So this kind of opposite meaning seems to be present in a lot of things related to infections. Even the word germ itself, right? Germ theory is the theory that these infectious microbes cause disease. And it's a theory because it hasn't been proven. But the word germ actually means a budding or new growth. And in biology, we refer to the germ cells as like the egg and the sperm, the cells that create new life, because that's the meaning of germ. But germ theory turned that around and changed the meaning of germ to mean something that's dangerous and invades us, rather than forming new life.
Would you, so you call it, I get the impression a lot of people believe that those who are susceptible to this or flu or anything like that are just, it's a weakened immune system, and you're just more generally susceptible to illness. Is there something valid about thinking that?
Well, I think that our immune system is a bit understood because it fits this warfare model that's related to germs invading our body and our body having to defend itself through an arsenal. There's even a type of immune cell called a natural killer cell, right? Which is, is pretty violent. But what I think our immune system does is it certainly does protect us from threats. And anytime like there's the structural integrity of our body is compromised, like such as when we get a cut or a laceration, then things can get in from the outside that are not supposed to. But what I think is really causing the diseases is actually toxic substances. And sometimes those can come from microorganisms, like we've all had experience with food poisoning. And the most common thing is that there'll be a food that's been around too long and there's a staphylococcus growing in it, and it puts out what's called staph toxin. And that toxin is what gives us food poisoning. And so what causes the illness is basically some kind of toxic exposure. And, in our modern lifestyle, we're putting toxic things in our body every single day, all the time. Anytime we eat processed food, anytime we eat at a restaurant, anytime we drink tap water, when we put on cosmetics and antiperspirant, when we breathe the air pollution, it goes on and on and on. So it's not a real big leap to realize that those are the things that actually cause the disease most likely. And basically our body then puts out exosomes to help us heal from that disease. And we can measure various properties of those, like their genetic material, with tests, and we call that a virus. And I think that's what's really been going on.
Well, what do you see happening? Because obviously this is, and there are there are lots of people in the medical community that are speaking out. Unfortunately, they don't have the public platform that Sanjay Gupta does, or obviously Dr. Fauci, people like that are pushing the party line. But how, if we go on as a society, what are the ramifications they seem, even though they're really backpedaling big time on their projections and acknowledging how far off they were, and there are going to be a lot less deaths than they claimed. Even doing that, though, they're still ratcheting up the crackdown and the lockdown, and everybody, you have to wear a mask, keep your social distancing. So if this goes on for another month, even let alone 2 or 3 months, we're not going to have an economy left. And what are the social ramifications, and what are the ramifications of the future? Because my suspicion is, now that they've shown they can do this and get people to comply, why wouldn't they just do it whenever, hey, we're going into lockdown mode? And they're already talking about that this virus is going to make a comeback in the fall. I mean, what are we looking at long term here? I don't think America will ever be the same.
Yeah, well, I am extremely concerned about the precedent that this is setting. And, we haven't gotten out of this mess yet, so it's hard to think about the future too much. But what I'm really concerned about now is that people have been out of work for a significant amount of time. People who own small businesses, I'm sure they're not going to be able to reopen those businesses. And I think people, especially people with limited resources, they're running out of money. And when they run out of money, they're going to run out of food. And when people start to run out of food and other necessities, I think they're going to turn to violence. And I'm really concerned about that kind of thing happening. Yeah,
I mean, and you're, well, we tend to think of, and obviously people in the medical field, doctors do well financially, but I know a couple that are, their practices have been decimated by this. One of them had to delay his retirement because he lost everything in the stock market. Now you're in a field that may be immune from this, because you may be seeing an increase in like virtual clients, because we're all going to need to be talking to psychiatrists at this point. But how is this impacting people like that are doing really well? This is not just the working class and the poor that are always hit by everything, and are going to have they'll hire back probably for even less money. We can't pay $12 an hour anymore. Now it's going to be $9. But when are we going to see some people that have or were successful business leaders? I'm still waiting for business leaders to talk out about, this is crazy. Why are you why are you closing all these businesses? Why are we seeing such a uniformity of opinion at the top like this?
Well, I think the main reason is because all of the information that most people consume is controlled by just a few media companies, and all of their information comes from either Reuters or the Associated Press. And most people are getting their information from the news media. And if they're doing that, then they're only hearing one story. And the story is to be afraid and stay at home, or else you're going to die. And so under that circumstance, the business opportunities become less important. I do think there's a silver lining here, because people are at home with their children and they're getting that experience. And that's the way we're meant to live. And I've even heard from some people that they are thinking about not sending their kids back to school after this, which would be, in my opinion, quite a good thing. But once the realization that your life is totally ruined hits, it's going to be a very hard pill to swallow, and I don't know how people are going to recover from this. But even now, it's hard for me to believe that people are accepting this. Even people I'm close to, and I tell them the information, over and over. I hear this. Well, why would the government do this to us? I can't believe the government would do something bad or lie to us. And it's just astonishing, because just look at history, and all you see are lies and manipulation from governments, not just our government, but governments all around the world.
Why would anybody trust? But I'm especially at this time of year, I'm astonished, really. Frankly, I thought that there would be some backlash about closing the churches on Easter. I'm amazed that you're not hearing about the fundamentalist preachers saying, hell no. Government's not, and I don't hear any of that. Am I missing something? I think that's a chance to make an effective protest, but it doesn't look like it's going to happen.
I did hear of one clergy member, I forget what denomination of church, but this was down in Florida, and he held services, and the police came and arrested him.
Yeah.
Wow. This is what's going on. You know, I was at having dinner with my kids last night, and they're 8 and 11 years old, and they're the most important thing to me. And in fact, the reason I'm working day and night, and I'm working 14 or 16 hours every single day of the week, trying to learn as much as I can and get this information out. And the reason I'm doing that is for their future. So we were sitting at the dinner table, and I brought out a copy of the Constitution. And I read them the First Amendment of the Constitution, and we broke it down piece by piece. And once they understood what it says, and they applied it to the current situation, you should have seen the look on their faces. They just suddenly realized that we no longer have those rights. We don't have the right to assemble. We don't have the right to travel. We don't have the right of religious expression. And we don't have a right of the press because of the censorship that's occurring now. So it's really a place that I never thought I would be in my life, in the United States of America, where the First Amendment to the Constitution has been stripped from us as a right. And this is a fundamental human right that is delineated in the Constitution. It's not something that any authority figure can give us or take away. And yet they're trying to take it away, and people are just accepting that.
Absolutely. We only have a couple of minutes left. I want to give you time to talk about, promote anything, or just sum up however you'd like to do so.
Yeah, sure. Well, I want to thank everyone for taking the opportunity to listen to me talk. I know that I have some controversial opinions, and I don't have all the answers, but I know for sure that this whole situation is not right. If you want to learn more about the science, on my YouTube channel, which is called Medicamentum Authentica, that's MEDICAMENTUM, and authentic with an A. There's a video called Special Report, and that is my scientific presentation about the relationship between viruses and exosomes. And I give that presentation so that you don't have to be a scientist to understand it. Same style that I used to give talks at medical schools and conferences. I also do natural healing consultations, and not just in psychiatry, because the body and mind are connected. And so I work with people with any type of ailment. And you can reach me through my website. It's going to be live in just a few hours, according to my web designer. Fingers are crossed. And that's andrewkaufmanmd.com. That's ANDREWKAU, F as in Frank, MAN, MD like medical doctor.com.
Sounds wonderful. Well, you keep doing the great work, and people like you are going to make a difference. We all have to speak out about this, and we can't stand still for it. And let's hope that our fellow citizens, it's a numbers game here. As long as we can wake up enough people. As Robert F. Kennedy said, and I end every show like this: every time you send forth a tiny ripple of hope, it can end up being a current to break down the mightiest walls of oppression and injustice. Thank you so much, Dr. Andrew Kaufman, for being with us, and thanks to you, all of you out there, for listening to I Protest. See you next week. Thank you.